Once again, I'm back, and I continue to dissect issues here and there which are affecting us either directly or indirectly, especially now that we are headed to this period whereby politicians fold up their sleeves and hit the ground running to continue cheating people as they are used to. So I'm back, and what I do is to try to sensitize the population and to share my ideas which are subject to debate. I'm not claiming to be possessing monopoly of wisdom, but I share what I know and I share my ideas which are subject to debate. You can disagree with me, or you can agree with me to some extent or entirely, of maybe how I see things and on how you see things on your end. So we are in a critical period whereby politicians are coming out looking for positions of influence, the positions of leadership, to execute what they think are the problems we are facing as a people, because at the end of the day, a leadership should come out and solve the problems of the people they lead. But the biggest problem we have as Kenyans is that we are having leaders, or people who call themselves leaders, who totally don't understand the problems we are facing as a country. For instance, if you ask the people in government, they will tell you they are doing the best, they are solving the problems the way they are supposed to be solved. But the people on the other side can tell you that they are not satisfied with how things are done. And those ones who call themselves opposition, they believe that the problem of this country is maybe the leadership which is in office currently. So Kenyans find themselves at the crossroads when they try to listen to all these things and when they try to understand the way forward on how they can mitigate their problems. So the question I ask is this: what is this problem that we are facing as a people? Because at the end of the day, if you look at how things are in the country, you can clearly see that there are problems, not even one problem, there are problems. So according to my own analysis, I can clearly report that the biggest problem we face as a people is that we spend recklessly as a country, which ends up dipping us into problems of finances, of joblessness, and all those things which are related. What do I mean by saying the biggest problem people face is lack of money, for example? Like, people don't have the purchasing power. And how can they get the purchasing power? The only clear way on how people can make money is by working, because you can't have money, or government can't give you free money. You can't expect a government or a working government to come and give you free money. We have a governmental system whereby we can't fund our own governments and government activities, or government offices for that matter, whereby we have a budget which we can't fund. We have a 4-point-something trillion budget, and the only money we can raise, according to the Finance Act, is about 2-point-something trillion. So we are running a government on debt. Each and every time we have a deficit on the budget. And you remember, according to Public Finance Management Act, you can't borrow money to fund the budget, meaning you can't borrow money to give counties, you can't borrow money to pay salaries, and you can't borrow money to even consume as a government. So the biggest problem we have as a country are systems, governmental systems, which are not working, which are overspending money. And until we solve that, we can elect whoever we want. But until we crack that problem, we can't solve anything. People come out and tell you they are the best suited to hold those offices, but until they explain how they are going to solve the problem of budget deficit, then we are in a hot soup. We can't solve anything in the short run and even in the long run unless we act and act appropriately. The biggest problem we have is that the governments we put in office or the governments which are being elected, they try to become popular. Like they can do anything they want to do at all means, provided they become popular. For instance, debt rose from zero. In fact, when we got independence, we didn't have debt as much, and if it was there, it was something negligible. It was a very small amount of debt which was accrued by the colonial government who ruled Kenya before independence. So later on we got independence, and that's where things went wrong. Since independence, that's where we got it wrong. And if at all we want to solve issues, we should go back and trace the historical problems we have been facing as a people and try to solve them, because we can't move forward with a baggage from the past. So during the colonial period, some debt was accrued. Then the first government, which was run for 15 years, also accrued some debt. Then it continued, because at the end of the day, governments are going concern. They are perpetual. So they go ahead handing over debt until now, where we have hit a debt of more than 12 trillion. And the repayment of that debt still remains a mystery. I can say anything which was supposed to go wrong, it has gone wrong already. And until we solve things from the root cause of issues, then we can change leadership the way we want. We can put whoever we want to become president. But until we crack the problem, we will be circumnavigating around a problem. We go around a problem, and we can't solve anything at the end of the day. For instance, I was talking about how this borrowing became. Initially, we had international monetary funds which were giving loans to countries, especially the developing countries. And remember, these financial institutions were put forward by those developed countries, so they were running the interests of the business owners. So they called themselves some good names, and they came forward that they were giving loans to developing countries, including this country called Kenya. So when this problem started is when Kenya started borrowing money from the international monetary funds. For instance, then there were the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and IMF, International Monetary Fund, which are concessional, which are giving concessional loans, or which are kind of a multilateral kind of financial institutions. That's why you had President Ruto trying to push for multilateralism, but whether that can be actualized or can be factual is subject to debate. So that's where the problem started. Kenya got its first loan from World Bank, whereby the money was supposed to help the country develop as it recovered from the colonial era, and also to pay the colonizer to leave. So that's the first joke which happened in this country. Then remember, these loans which were given by IMF, African Development Bank, and World Bank are concessional, meaning they are negotiable. They sit around the table, then they negotiate on how much they want and how much they are willing to pay. So in most cases they are given at a lower interest rate. So it continued until it reached a point whereby it was hard for the country to return the money. So they started adding more obstacles to get the loan. You can't get the loan so easily because they said they started looking at the credit worthiness of a country, the ability to repay the loan, and all those things. So before they give you a loan, you negotiate, and maybe they give you something which maybe you're not intending to get, or the money which can't solve the problem you want to borrow for, because politicians started borrowing money to please people, for corruption, to loot, and all those things. So IMF added the restrictions on getting the concessional loans. So it reached a point whereby, since I've said that most politicians in this country, they do politics to please people and to please themselves. So they get the money which they loot, and the money which they give or they dish out as handouts to people for political expediency. So it reached a point whereby they can't get enough money from the concession in form of concessional loans, or from international monetary funds, from the World Bank, IMF, and even African Development Bank. So they turned to what we call G2G, or the bilateral loans, whereby a government makes a deal with another government and they are given loans. For instance, government of Kenya takes a loan from the government of China, or the government of Japan, or the government of France, for example. So those are bilateral loans, whereby you hear people say, or the president say, we have entered into a bilateral agreement with this and this for this and this. So those are the loans they turned to when the multilateral loans became so hard to repay or to get. So they made deals with the governments of China. China is the biggest, in fact, is the biggest lender to Kenya. So until it reached a point, especially in the past government, the government which was presided over by the so-called President Uhuru Kenyatta, Kenya continued to collect loans from China and other partners like Japan. When they come to Kenya, they say these are our development partners. But in the real sense, those are lenders who are lending Kenya some dubious loans which are not clear, which are not transparent. So, especially the past government, the government which took over from 2013 to 2022, that government entered into a spending spree and a borrowing expediency, whereby they borrowed money in large scale. Remember, Kibaki handed over a debt of about 1.8 trillion, and the moment Uhuru was handing over government, debt was about 11 trillion. And I'm sure the current regime, by the time they hand over government, debt will be about 18-20 trillion, and the next will take it to 30, whoever will take over, because there are problems we are facing as a people and we're not solving them, because no politician will tell you this. They will come and tell you the problem we have as a people is the current government. They want to take them from government so that they can continue doing what the past government has been doing. In fact, nobody should lie to you that when they took over government, they will do things differently, because government are perpetual kind of organizations. They are going concerns. They hand over. If it's debt, they hand over debt, and finished projects, they are handed over. So there is no way somebody can come and say, in fact, if we took over government, or if you elect us into government, then we are going to abolish, for example, the housing project, or the housing as whatever. It is not possible, because that thing is under the law. There is the Housing Act, which are they going to do away with that piece of legislation? It's not clear. It started from the word go. When Kenya got independence, the government which took over continued with what the colonial regime was doing. Go and find out what killed the Field Marshal General Baimongi. It is him trying to say we can't chase away a white colonizer and replace that person with a black colonizer. That's what he killed General Baimongi. You can go and find out. So governments have been handing over problems, have been handing over looting and everything to the next government. Let me continue with how we found ourselves in this kind of debt distress. So government to government kind of agreements or the bilateral agreements continued. Especially it was more intense, especially when Uhuru was president. He borrowed to an extent whereby Kenya was almost blacklisted. You go to China, they tell you, in fact, we are not saying that we don't want to give you loans, but can you finish the loan which you had already taken as a country? So we reached a point whereby it's even impossible to get a new loan. And in fact, as our government structures are structured, we are structured in such a way that we can't run a government without borrowing. Because, as I said, we spend more than we earn. So we have to borrow to sustain the living as a government. So it almost became impossible for this government to get even a bilateral agreement or a bilateral kind of a loan. So they switched to taxation, because if you can't get a loan and you need money to run a government, then you have to get that money by all means. So they switched to adding taxations here and there, adding VAT here and there, to try and raise the money which we need or which we can't borrow. So it reached a point whereby things are getting even more hard. Then Ruto, as he is always brilliant, so he said, what we are going to do now, we are going to do what we call securitization. Remember I said we have two types of loans from the larger perspective. We have local borrowing, or two types of kind of a borrowing. We have local borrowing and international borrowing. And we said local borrowing, we can have money in form of treasury bills and bonds, or infrastructure bonds. Yeah. International borrowing, I said we have multilateral kind of borrowing from IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the African Development Bank, and the World Bank. Then then we have bilateral borrowings, whereby it's a government to government. Then others we have like commercial loans or syndicated loans, or which are also known as the Euro bonds. So those are international borrowings. So remember, Kenya had exhausted all this kind of borrowing from international institutions or countries. They had exhausted multilateralism from World Bank, IMF, and all those. They had exhausted the G2G or bilateral. They had exhausted the commercial loans, the syndicated loans from even the Afrexim Bank, the Chinese bonds, the Euro bonds, and all those things. They had exhausted. Now, Ruto is coming up with another kind of a brilliant idea to continue doing, but it's another version of international borrowing. Now he's calling them securitized loans, or like off the book kind of loans. So the president will come and see, okay, we have funds which we allocate each and every year to some. Remember, according to Article 206, it says that all monies which are borrowed or which are received by or on behalf of the government will go to a consolidated fund, except the money which has been set aside by an act of parliament. So you find we have tourism levy, sports levy, youth levy, water levy, so many levies, RMLF, road maintenance levy fund. We have so many funds which have been separated by an act of parliament. Remember the Public Finance Management Act, as it was enacted in 2012, is not it doesn't look the same now. So what happened in 2015, some clauses were removed, some sections of that act were removed to pave way to creation of so many funds. Social insurance fund, social health insurance fund, we have housing levy fund, so many funds. So it created so many funds. We have even the railway fund, the World Development Fund. So the president now comes and looks, okay, this is a legislation, I can't like kind of remove it from existence just like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be brilliant around these ideas. Now he wants to build bombers, and he doesn't have the money. He can't borrow because they have exhausted all the sources of borrowing. Now he says, I'm going to do now what we call securitization. Now he goes and borrows what we call the bomber's bond from wherever. We don't know because it's off book. It's not in the books. This is now the bomber's bond from I don't know where. For instance, we can say from the government of India, for example. Now the bomber's bond will be securitized by what? By tourism fund. This money we allocate each and every year in terms of tourism fund, because according to the budget, all these funds are funded. Money is allocated to tourism fund, money is allocated to sports fund, money is allocated to this, and to some extent I can agree with him that this money has never done anything for the people. So he goes around it and securitizes the money, so he can get a loan from international. You can get an international loan, comes and builds bombers. Now he securitizes the loan. Now he says the money which we are going to allocate each and every year in form of tourism fund from the budget, it now goes direct to pay the bombers bond. Now he goes to Talanta bond. He goes and borrows a Talanta bond and he gets a Talanta bond, Talanta Stadium bond. He says now we have a bond, we can solve the problem we have. For example, we can build a stadium, Talanta City Stadium. Then he securitizes it with sports fund. The money which will be allocated to sports fund will go to pay the Talanta bond. Same tricks, different ways, like just being brilliant around the same ideas. That one is not going to last for long because we are going to exhaust all these things. In fact, he goes ahead and even says, I can agree to some extent that he wants to form what we call an infrastructure fund. Infrastructure fund is kind of a consolidated fund. So Ruto, being Ruto, now goes about and says, okay, we want to do all these things. We want to come up with infrastructure fund. Infrastructure fund will be kind of a consolidated fund, but in this case, it will now accommodate all the monies raised from the infrastructure. For example, the housing. Remember, the houses which are being built by the national government under the funding, I don't know whether it is housing corporation or housing as an independent kind of an entity, but these things are intertwined. So all the monies which builds these houses are cut from the salaries of people in form of housing levy fund. So they pull resources, then they build the houses. Remember, in the short run, these houses are going to accommodate people, and people will be paying rent. Now the rent will be pulled together under infrastructure fund. It will be a new fund. Now he's saying, which is a kind of a brilliant idea, but whether it will work or it will not work is subject to wait and see. Let's have an infrastructure fund whereby we can pull resources together, and the resources we pull together, we will borrow from it. Like, we don't now want commercial loans, like we don't want international loans, we don't want local borrowing. Let's create a fund, an infrastructure fund, whereby if we want money to build a road, for example, we can borrow directly from that fund. And even if Uganda wants money, wants a borrowing from Kenya, we can lend money to Uganda in form of the money from the infrastructure fund. Now he thinks of becoming like China or Singapore, I don't know where. It looks like a good idea. It looks like a brilliant idea. But whether it will work or it will not is a matter of wait and see. But there is one thing I want to address. People should try to find information. All these informations I have found, but the politician of this country knows the best way to hide information from people is put it on writing. People don't read. They don't want to even find out these things. So as I was saying, a Kenyan politician now has mastered the art of doing politics. The usual politics. The politics which have brought us to this point whereby census is used for political mobilization, not to plan for to solve unemployment, not to plan for health, not to plan on how people will live a better life, but to be used as a tool to plan for politics. Which region has many people? Who am I going to partner with? A Kenyan politician now has made sure people are not getting this kind of information. Instead of this person coming and explaining to people what they are doing and where they are doing them, they pretend they have done public participation. Like for example, I can give you an example. You remember during the BBI, when the BBI bill was presented to Siaya County government 9 in the morning, that bill was supposed to be given back to IBC after 90 days, but it was taken there at, in fact, 9 in the morning, and by 3 in the afternoon, they have already passed the bill. That is the absurdity of the Kenyan politics. They will make sure you don't get this information so that they can create a problem and pretend to be solving the problem. For example, look at all these people who have been in government. When Didi Nyoro was chairman budget, he passed the finance bill. He came up with a big budget, which prompted the finance bill to be so big also, which led to the unrest in the country. But now he claims these things are not done right. Kachawa, when he was in government, he defended from Nairobi River to housing to funding model in the universities to everything. But now he is distancing himself from everything. And maybe miraculously this person now gets back to government, he will defend everything. These are the same tactics which has been used since, but they have not solved anything. The Kenyan politicians have mastered the art. Instead of giving you the information, instead of putting up a good legislation which will cushion you as a person, they will give you handouts. Nyariba Richard MP will queue people, 5,000 people, and give them 500 each, and they will claim, in fact, the money is giving them is part of the salary. So how much is this person earning? How much is it? If we are giving them too much salary, then people need to think about it. We should now go deep and dissect the issues which are eating us up and let us solve them as early as now. Until next time, we will continue to dissect all these issues.